Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This isn't technically my revenge, but it's some payback I got to witness up close, take joy from, and slightly participate in. The background is most of the story, so this will be a bit long. Trigger warning for self-harm. I was in the Navy, stationed at the submarine base in Groton, Connecticut, back in 2020. I had a friend I met in boot camp, and we ended up in the same class for our A school, Navy job training. We'll call that friend Mike. Now, Mike wasn't the most physically fit guy. He was short, kind of chubby, and wore glasses. However, Mike was really smart, and as the sonar technician he was meant to be, he would have been amazing. He had a pragmatic way of looking at things that I really valued in a friend, and I know it would have made him successful if he had made it out to the fleet. While in school, we had a couple of petty officers who were real hard-asses. They somehow convinced themselves they were super soldiers, despite the fact that our jobs in that field are really nerd-centric. You get picked for that job because of your math and computer skills, not your deadlift number. Still, they were both all about being fit and working out all the time. We had Petty Officer Johnson and Petty Officer Rodriguez, both built like linebackers and with attitudes to match. We would do physical training 3 times a week, and while most of us could keep up, Mike often fell behind on runs or didn't quite meet what these two idiots believed to be the standard. To be clear, Mike did pass the minimum requirements for fitness. He just didn't go as extreme as these guys. Side note for other Navy vets, he got the MC Pond coin for how hard he pushed himself at PT the day the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy visited. The end result was that they would constantly berate and belittle Mike. They'd call him fat, lazy, and everything else. They'd tell him he should kill himself, you name it. They were always on his ass despite him passing his assessments. One day, after a particularly grueling PT session, I overheard Johnson say to Mike, "Hey Tubby, maybe if you spent less time stuffing your face and more time running, you wouldn't be such a disgrace to the uniform." Mike, exhausted and red-faced, just mumbled, "Yes, petty officer," and walked away. At some point, Mike pushed himself too hard and injured his knee. He told these petty officers he was injured and had been seen by the doc on base. The doc had put him on light duty so the knee could recover. He had the paperwork to back it up. They elected to ignore that and threaten him with kicking him out if he didn't do the workouts. "Light duty? That's for pussies," Rodriguez sneered. "You either do the full workout or you're out. Got it?" So Mike kept pushing himself, injuring himself more, and his mental health degraded the whole time. In my time in the Navy, you didn't get mental health services, really. The only person to talk to like that was the chaplain. For those who don't know, the chaplain is the religious leader, usually a pastor/priest/rabbi that is signed up as a commissioned officer. Our chaplain was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Thompson, the sweetest little woman you ever met, but as a chaplain, she held the rank of Lieutenant Commander, a high-ranking officer. So, Mike set up a meeting with the chaplain to talk about things. When Mike informed the petty officers he would be missing class the next day for his chaplain meeting, they yelled at and berated him more. They called him a pussy, useless, not fit for the Navy, and everything else you can imagine. They convinced Mike he was being weak and the chaplain wouldn't care about his issues, that nobody would care. They promised to make life even harder if he didn't show the next day, so he canceled his meeting. Evidently, bad luck hit, and that night his girlfriend was also breaking it off with him. She wasn't worth his time or money, but he couldn't see that. That night, I awoke to a 3 a.m. call from Mike. I couldn't hear anything, and I asked several times, "Mike, you there? Are you okay?" It wouldn't have been the first time that I got a drunk dial from one of my friends after a hard day like Mike had. Sailors have been known to drown their sorrows a bit. Eventually, I figured it was a butt dial drunk dial and hung up and went back to bed. I still regret that decision. The next day, all hell broke loose. Me and a couple other friends got calls from Mike's now ex-girlfriend informing us he was in the hospital because he slit his own throat. Turned out a few of us got that 3 a.m. call, but Mike couldn't speak at the time and was kind of out of it due to blood loss. We finished what we had to do on base and rushed over to the hospital. As we got there, the chaplain was on her way out, and we passed her in the hallway. She spoke to us briefly to say that Mike would be okay, and she wouldn't forget this. I have never seen a look on someone's face that so accurately depicted raw, unfiltered rage. It took us all by surprise because she was such a small, sweet, and personable lady. But the look in her eyes, you could just tell she wanted someone to pay for this. She wanted revenge, and we all knew she wore the kind of rank that could get it done. We visited Mike, who could barely talk, but he told us the story of what had happened, what he was thinking at the time, and how glad he was it didn't work. Apparently, it was cold enough that the blood clotted on the outside of his neck and made a kind of patch that kept him alive long enough for the EMS to find him and get him to a hospital. The doctor said he missed his carotid by about a millimeter. A week went by, and we hadn't heard anything until we got called in by Chief Petty Officer Anderson, the head of the training command, the boss to these petty officers. He said he wanted to check on the rest of us and make sure there weren't any other issues with these guys he wasn't aware of, and that we were all okay. I let him know about an ass chewing he gave me a few months back, that I was really set up by these guys and they had lied to him. My friends cited a couple of other examples of their own with these guys being generally crappy, dishonest people. I don't think it mattered. I think their fates were already sealed and we were being asked for more ammo to bury them with. The next day they were nowhere to be found, and we were introduced to new instructors who would be taking over our training permanently. After class, I decided to stop by and ask the chaplain what happened. She told me she had never been more disgusted by the actions of a sailor than these two guys who convinced someone not to come see her. She teared up a bit, regretting that she didn't get the chance to help Mike before he made his attempt. In her mind, it was these two that precipitated and enabled Mike's attempt, so on to the revenge. The chaplain told me she went to Captain Williams, the commanding officer of the entire base, and demanded their immediate discharge. He granted it. Both petty officers were immediately processed out with dishonorable discharges. I can't remember the exact charge I heard they cited for it, but I know the Navy has a way of selling BS on paper when they want a certain outcome, especially officers at that high level. So basically they get no VA benefits of any kind, got kicked out of the base housing they lived in, and could probably only find work at a gas station or under the table stuff somewhere. Also, I know from someone else who got the boot that the Navy only pays for a single bus ticket to get you back home, not your family or any of your belongings. When you have a discharge like that, no company with DoD contracts is allowed to hire you. That includes McDonald's because they have stores on bases throughout the country, Taco Bell, Subway, etc. None of them will give you a job. They can't. And they don't want to anyway. So, I don't know where these guys went or what became of them, but I know their lives were irrevocably ruined. Johnson had about 18 years in, so he was 2 years from retirement and lost it all. Rodriguez was at about 12 years, so he also lost a lot. Wherever they are now, I'd be very surprised to hear they're making more than minimum wage. As for Mike, well, he made a full recovery. He got a full medical discharge, which is an honorable discharge that meant E5 pay for the rest of his life, full benefits, and a referral to a counselor in his home state once he got back there. All paid for by the Navy. We lost touch over the years, but I did see on Facebook he got himself together, became a software engineer at a tech startup, and got married. Last I heard, he was doing pretty well for himself. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd end up in a situation where I'd be grateful for my uncle's obsession with guns and security, but life has a funny way of surprising you. My name's Jake, and I'm a 32-year-old landscaper living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Well, it used to be quiet until our new homeowner association board took over. I've lived in this house for about 5 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a small 2-bedroom place with a garage where I keep all my landscaping equipment. When I first moved in, there wasn't a homeowner association, and everyone pretty much minded their own business. That all changed last year when a group of newcomers to the neighborhood decided we needed some structure and rules to maintain property values. At first, it wasn't too bad. They implemented some basic guidelines about lawn maintenance and trash pickup days, but then they started getting more aggressive. They began issuing fines for the most ridiculous things. Having your garage door open for too long, parking your car in your own driveway overnight, that sort of nonsense. I tried to stay out of their way and just do my own thing, but apparently that wasn't good enough for them. It all came to a head about a month ago. I got home from a long day of work, covered in dirt and sweat, to find a bright orange notice taped to my front door. It was from the Homeowner Association, demanding that I remove all commercial equipment from my property within 48 hours or face daily fines. They claimed my landscaping tools violated some rule about operating a business from a residential property. I was furious. This was my livelihood they were messing with. I called the Homeowner Association president, Karen. Yes, her actual name was Karen. I couldn't make this up if I tried, to try and reason with her. But she was having none of it. "Rules are rules, Jake," she said in that condescending tone that made me want to reach through the phone and strangle her. "We can't have the neighborhood looking like some kind of industrial zone. You'll have to find somewhere else to store your tools." I tried explaining that I couldn't afford to rent a separate storage space, that this would effectively put me out of business. But Karen didn't care. She just kept repeating that I had 48 hours to comply or start paying fines. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. There was no way I could move all my equipment in just 2 days, and I definitely couldn't afford their ridiculous fines. I needed a plan, and fast. That's when I remembered my Uncle Bob was coming to visit that weekend. Uncle Bob was, well, let's just say he was a character. Ex-military, gun enthusiast, and perpetually prepared for the zombie apocalypse. He drove my mom crazy with his conspiracy theories, but right now, his paranoia might just come in handy. I called him up and explained the situation. He listened quietly, then said, "Don't you worry, Jake. I'll be there tomorrow morning. We'll show these homeowner association tyrants what happens when they mess with our family." The next day, Uncle Bob rolled up in his massive pickup truck, loaded down with enough gear to supply a small army. He helped me set up some discreet security cameras around the garage and gave me a crash course in home defense. I felt a little silly, like we were preparing for a war instead of dealing with some nosy neighbors, but Uncle Bob insisted it was necessary. "Trust me, kid," he said, patting his ever-present sidearm. "When people think they have power over you, they'll try to use it. We just need to be ready when they do." We spent the rest of the day reinforcing the garage door and setting up a few surprises for any unwanted visitors. By the time we were done, I felt like I was living in Fort Knox. Uncle Bob seemed pleased with our work and decided to stick around for a few more days, just in case. The 48-hour deadline came and went. I got more notices, more threatening phone calls from Karen, but I stood my ground. I told them I wasn't moving my equipment and that if they had a problem with it, they could take me to court. A week passed, and things seemed to quiet down. I started to think maybe they had given up. I should have known better. It was around 2 a.m. when the alarms went off. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and ran to the spare room where we had set up the security monitors. What I saw made my blood boil. There, clear as day on the night vision cameras, were 5 people trying to break into my garage. I recognized Karen right away, along with a couple other homeowner association board members. They had brought some guy with them who was working on picking the lock. I was about to call the police when Uncle Bob burst into the room, fully dressed and armed like he was about to storm Normandy. "Let's go greet our guests," he said with a grin that was somehow both cheerful and terrifying. We made our way quietly to the garage. Uncle Bob positioned himself by the side door while I stayed back, ready to call the cops if things got out of hand. We could hear them whispering on the other side of the main garage door. "Hurry up, Jeff," Karen hissed. "We need to get this junk out of here before he wakes up." "I'm trying," the lockpicker, presumably Jeff, whispered back. "This lock is tougher than I thought." That's when we heard the click of the lock giving way, followed by the creak of the garage door starting to open. Uncle Bob gave me a nod, then hit the button to flood the driveway with light. The look on their faces when that bright light hit them was priceless. They stood there blinking like deer in headlights as Uncle Bob stepped out, his gun clearly visible in its holster. "Evening, folks," he said casually, as if he was greeting them at a backyard barbecue. "Bit late for a social call, isn't it?" Karen tried to regain her composure, puffing herself up like an angry cat. "This is homeowner association business," she said. "We have every right to be here." Uncle Bob just chuckled. "Well now, I'm pretty sure breaking and entering is still illegal, even for homeowner associations. Why don't y'all just take a seat right there on the driveway while we wait for the police to arrive?" They didn't move at first, just stood there gaping at him. Then Jeff, apparently deciding he wanted no part of this, turned to run. He made it about 3 steps before tripping over one of Uncle Bob's surprises. A thin wire stretched across the driveway. He went down hard, face-planting right into the concrete. That seemed to snap the others out of their stupor. 2 of them rushed to help Jeff, while Karen and the other board member tried to make a break for it. But Uncle Bob was faster. Before I knew what was happening, he had Karen and her friend on the ground, zip-tied their hands behind their backs, and was working on securing the other 3. "Jake," he called out, "why don't you go ahead and call the police now? Tell them we've got some trespassers detained." I didn't need to be told twice. I called cop and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they'd send officers right away. While we waited, Karen alternated between threatening us with lawsuits and begging us to let them go. Uncle Bob just ignored her, keeping a watchful eye on our captives. When the police finally arrived, they were surprised, to say the least. It's not every day they respond to a call and find 5 people zip-tied in a driveway. I showed them the security footage and explained the whole situation. To their credit, the officers were professional about it. They took statements from everyone, including our unwanted visitors. Karen tried to spin some story about how they were just doing a routine inspection, but the evidence was pretty damning. In the end, all 5 of them were arrested for attempted breaking and entering, trespassing, and conspiracy to commit theft. As they were being led away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about protecting my stuff anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could push people around just because they had a little bit of power. The aftermath was pretty intense. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Most people were shocked at what the homeowner association board had tried to do. There was an emergency meeting called, and the entire board was voted out. A new, more reasonable group took over, and one of their first acts was to abolish the rule about commercial equipment on residential property. As for me, I became something of a local hero. People would stop by to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the old board. Some even started hiring me for their landscaping needs, saying they wanted to support a man of principle. Uncle Bob stuck around for another week, basking in the glow of his moment of glory. He kept trying to convince me to set up a neighborhood watch program, complete with nightly patrols and secret handshakes. I managed to talk him down to just helping me install a better security system. In the months since then, things have calmed down a lot. The new homeowner association board is much more hands-off, focusing on actual community improvements instead of nitpicking every little thing. Karen and her cronies are still dealing with the legal fallout from their little midnight raid. Last I heard, they were trying to plea bargain down to misdemeanor charges. As for me, well, I'm just glad to be able to focus on my work without worrying about someone trying to steal my livelihood. And every time I look at that reinforced garage door, I can't help but smile and think, thanks, Uncle Bob. I guess the moral of the story is, don't mess with a man's tools, especially when he has a paranoid gun-loving uncle. You never know what might happen. The next one is a petty revenge story. I tend to ramble, so I will do my best to keep this brief. One morning, while getting ready for work, I responded to a Tinder message from a guy who happened to be in the same field of work as my brother-in-law. In his field, a lot of the guys knew each other, so I mentioned Bill. He said he knew of him but didn't really know him and worked at different locations/shifts. I chit-chatted a bit through the morning when he suddenly brought up that discretion was really important to him, as he had certain kinks and an open marriage he wanted to keep private. Immediate red flag, so I let the conversation fizzle. Afternoon comes, and my sister calls me while I am at work. This is concerning as she never calls while I am working, so I step away to take the call. To summarize the call, she opens up with, "Hey, are you seeing a guy in husband's field of work?" Me, "What? No? Why?" Sister, "Because some guy named Tinder Dude is telling all his coworkers he is banging husband's sister-in-law but didn't realize husband's best friend is his temping at their location. Husband's bestie immediately texted husband to warn you to stay away from the dude cause he's a psycho-alcoholic piece of crap." Me, "Oh, is he now? Okay, lean into it. Tell brother-in-law to tell his bestie that he's heard all about how when Tinder Dude and I tried to do the horizontal hop, Tinder Dude said he couldn't get there unless I would squat over his face to give him a taste of my liquid gold. When I said no, he started begging me and calling me mommy. Joke's on you, dude. I don't care what people think about me, but I know you care what people think about you. You started the narrative. I ended it. He unmatched me on Tinder, and I never heard anything about it again, but hearing the work culture stories from my brother-in-law leads me to believe he probably heard a lot of jokes about his pee and mommy fetishes for a long while. The next one is a malicious compliance story. When I was in high school, we got a new principal who had a very annoying policy. IDK, what else to call it, where 2x a week we would stay extra in homeroom and be given a prompt to write about. Now, I actually love to write fiction. The prompts we were given were always Hallmark special dribble that were stale to write. Think along the lines of, write about a time you and your friend had an argument and how you worked through it type of prompts. I found them belittling, boring, and a waste of both students' and teachers' time. Sometimes I'd refuse to write, sometimes I'd write like 2 sentences just to appease my teacher. IDK, why they irked me so badly, but they really did. So one day we got a prompt along the lines of, write about a time when you felt disrespected and how you overcame it. Initially, I just refused to write, but my teacher, who was my fave teacher, pushed saying I needed to write something to turn in. I sat thinking for a bit before a perfect scenario came to mind, and I felt like I was grinning like the Grinch. I decided to write about my orientation at the school. So, when I went to orientation, my mom went with me, and it started in the auditorium with the principal giving a speech overview. We sat in the front row, and I noticed the principal check out my mom more than once. After the auditorium, we could walk around, and my mom wanted to ask the principal some questions. During their interaction, I once again noticed him checking out my mom's boobs. She was just in a t-shirt, but is a C-cup, so even in a basic t-shirt, there's some cleavage. Afterwards, my mom said how nice he was, and I looked at her and said, "Mom, he was checking you out the whole time." And we moved on. I wrote about this and also mentioned how he never apologized and how I felt he had disrespected both of us. I turned it in with a crap-eating grin. Being my favorite teacher, they knew something was up when I had actually completed this writing prompt while also being happy about it. I sat down and they immediately started reading it. He let out a surprised loud ha ha, and I looked over with a smile and said, "What's wrong, teacher? Something funny?" He just snickered quietly while the rest of the class looked at me confused. I thought that was the end of it, but later got called to the guidance counselor. They had my writing and asked me about it. One of the first defenses was, I'm sure he wasn't really staring at her chest, sometimes he just isn't paying attention, which instantly made it worse to me since they were essentially defending him. When they realized that didn't go the way they wanted, she switched to, I'm sorry you both felt this way about the interaction. Would you like us to talk to him about it? We could arrange for him to apologize to you both if that will help resolve things. I said no. To be honest, I hadn't found it to be a huge deal. Men can be disrespectful, and this was an instance of that, so I just wanted to move on and forget it, not bring more attention to myself. I had written about it more to throw his stupid prompt assignment back in his face, rather than try to get an apology from him. IDK if he ever saw or was told about the writing, but it was a satisfying morning for me. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.